There's gonna be a crappy sequel. If you get that reference, we can be friends. Okay, so it's time to review the new Blair Witch Project movie. It's just titled Blair Witch, which annoys me a little bit, because that is basically the nickname for the original movie. It's a lot like when they made Texas Chainsaw. They basically took the nickname for the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and named the movie that. So yeah, that's the first thing that stands against this movie. The movie's directed by Adam Wingard. It stars James McCune and Callie Hernandez. And the plot essentially concerns Heather's younger brother, James. Around 20 years after his own sister went missing, decides to head into the woods and try and see if he can find his sister, or indeed any trace of her whereabouts. He's accompanied on this trip by a few friends, including Lisa, who is documenting the entire thing as part of a documentary project. Does this sound familiar yet? They meet up with a pair of online paranormal investigatory types who head into the forest with them. They are quite suspicious, and fairly rightfully so, as it turns out, of the pair. From there, basically a lot of the same sort of usual expected stuff happens, and you get quite bored and a little bit sad, or at least I did anyway. First things first, I should say that I'm relatively fond of the original Blair Witch. I do think it's somewhat overrated in that it didn't really do anything majorly new in terms of the style of its filming, which is the thing that most people kind of commend it for. That type of thing had been done before. What I do think is pretty awesome about the Blair Witch Project is its tone and its atmosphere and its storytelling, and the fact that rather than being a string of peaks and troughs in scariness, it's more or less kind of a big build up to the finale of the film, like one big kind of, you know, upward swing. Considering that the end of the movie doesn't really cover a whole lot, most of the questions that you came in with the movie are still left unanswered, and I have to say that with this sequel, that's still the case. For me, a good sequel should answer a lot of the questions that are left in the first movie and create a lot of new questions of its own. Instead, what this does is kind of just not answer any of those questions and maybe add a couple that you know, probably weren't intended to be added. I've got to say, admittedly, I haven't seen Blair Witch 2, The Book of Shadows, but by all accounts I'm not missing much, and this movie kind of skips over that anyway from what I'm told. This movie's more of a remake than a sequel, you know. Obviously the original Blair Witch, it was shot on like DV tape, whereas this movie obviously shot on high definition digital video, you know, with drone cams and stuff thrown in. It does have a much more cinematic feel than the original, because there are so many more cameras knocking about that they switch back and forth between. I'd say that the best way that I can kind of describe the movie is to say that rather than being like the Blair Witch Project, it's like the movies that were inspired by the Blair Witch Project. This film has got far more in common with the likes of one of the Paranormal Activity sequels, or like the Quarantine movies or something like that. It's not, in terms of its narrative, it's not really like the Blair Witch Project at all. This is very much a bang, a loud noise off camera happens and then people kind of turn and run around and look for it. That's very much what's going on here, much unlike the original movie, which, as I said before, has rather a unique narrative. Now, the movie obviously is basically full of callbacks to the original, and in that sense it feels a lot more like a remake, you know, piles of rocks gathering. And well, I get that there should be some callbacks, obviously, but at the same time it kind of feels lazy. This movie doesn't have a whole lot of new tropes of its own. Something that the movie does incorporate in, that wasn't anywhere near the original Blair Witch, is that there's a gore scene in the movie with some lovely blood and pus. But the gore scene leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Essentially, the result of said gore scene, when there is some injury detail, it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense, and it's like, well, what did that add? And it turns out that it added nothing. And if that gore scene, if the result of it had any sort of impact on the rest of the film, then I would have said, yeah, fair enough, because it was quite effectively put together. But ultimately, it really has nothing to do with anything else in the movie, so what can you say? Like I say, for me this really just felt like a modern remake of the Blair Witch Project. That was my sort of trouble with it, I guess. This feels a little bit more like it's been made for kind of a newer generation, a post Blair Witch Project generation. I was about to call it Blair Witch, but obviously you can't do that anymore, who've grown accustomed to the likes of Paranormal Activity and Quarantine being the norm for horror. So as you've probably established, I didn't like this movie at all, really. There's one or two positives about it. Like I say, the gore scene is quite well affected, but unfortunately pointless. Yeah, the movie just as a whole really wasn't good. Unfortunately, much as I was hoping to enjoy it, Blair Witch receives a score of 3 out of 10 from me. The cleaner and higher definition video of the film does not detract from the fact that it's really missing any sense of purpose. Frankly, this could be any number of modern found footage movies that are released. It just happens to have the Blair Witch name attached to it, and as a result of that it will do quite well, I'd imagine. But yeah, this film's poor. I've got to put it out there right now, it's a poor movie. I wouldn't recommend going to see it. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Luke Innes. Please feel free to like, comment and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. Tell me your thoughts on the film in the comments below. Please also check the description box where you'll find the link to my podcast. It is called Ironcast. It's all about music, and I really would appreciate you going to check that out. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.